This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Franny's Pharmacy.
Now more than ever, it's important that our society focuses more on our mental and physical health. At Franny's Pharmacy, the team is committed to their community's need of being happy, healthy, and stress-free. Come learn how Franny's Pharmacy can assist you in a clean, professional environment with their expert bud tenders that are excited to educate you about the benefits of their lab-tested, DEA-certified CBD products. Franny's Pharmacy also offers wholesale and franchise opportunities. Visit their website at frannysPharmacy.com, and that's pharmacy with an F, and use the promo code CannaConnect10 for an exclusive Cannabinoid Connect discount. Again, that's Franny's Pharmacy with an F.com and use the promo code CannaConnect10 for an exclusive Cannabinoid Connect discount. Franny's Pharmacy, putting the farm back into pharmacy.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Canna Health.
Hey cannabis consumers, have you ever consumed a cannabis product thinking it'll make you feel a certain way, but then it doesn't? Don't you wish you had a clear understanding of your own DNA so that you could make informed decisions about what type of cannabis products interact best with your system? Well, now you can with EndoDNA. EndoDNA is a simple DNA test that maps your entire endocannabinoid system and then matches that summary with a specific cannabinoid ratio and terpene profile that best aligns with your unique genotype. Imagine being armed with personal information when visiting a dispensary. You'll have the knowledge and power and capability to purchase products that best align with your genotype. Visit their website to purchase the EndoDNA Collection Kit and Endo Decoded Report at endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. Again, that's endodna.com/products and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. The future of cannabinoid therapeutics is here with EndoDNA. Hey Ronit, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yes, founder and publisher at Honeysuckle magazine. From what I've read, doing some research, that I think y'all started in 2013. Is that right?
Well, kind of like the first sort of like online post. Yeah. So basically, Honeysuckle's independent, and it was, even more independent indie back then. So I mean, it kind of started like I started it. So like technically the first blog post was at the end of 2013, but I'm not sure how like established I'd say we were.
Got you. Okay. And what was that blog post about? Just out of curiosity.
It was about like street culture in Detroit. Actually, it was that I lived there, and that's where I started Honeysuckle. So it was just like about the different streets, or I'm sorry, the different shops, because Detroit has a really cool kind of vibe. And so my first stories were about like musicians or shops, and that one was about the shops in Detroit.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, well, that's actually a really great segue to kind of kick this conversation off. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your upbringing in Detroit and, how that led you to founding Honeysuckle, which is an award-winning female-led print and digital platform that intersects cannabis, gender, sexuality, and racial politics along with pop culture.
Yeah. Well, so I've lived in different places. So I was born in Detroit, and then I grew up in Texas. So my parents moved there when I was like a toddler. My dad is Israeli. So like family was kind of everywhere, and went back to Detroit, lived in Israel, then back to Detroit again, and then ended up in New York. So like in Tel Aviv is when I started writing. I got an internship at the Jerusalem Post and started working in the arts. And then was working like before I started Honeysuckle kind of in media, journalism, film, and just several things led to my desire. That's a Marley cat. My desire to kind of do my own thing. So for me, Honeysuckle's always been a sort of combination between media and film, actually, because it's so visually, like, we have a lot of photography, it's in print, kind of combining those mediums in publishing.
Gotcha. So it's just kind of this natural progression of various interests throughout your upbringing that kind of was like, hey, this seems right. This is a good fit.
I mean, it was natural and like it wasn't. I mean, it was, I don't know. I don't know if everyone's like this that starts their own thing, but it was based on certain difficult decisions, right? Like, I don't think you just do this kind of thing like because everything's like totally fine and you're content and like everything's easy, great. You usually do something like this because you're not okay with some stuff, so for me, I think like, overall I had some really great things and opportunities and just life overall, but there were just things I didn't feel maybe I had control over. And I didn't like that. Like, I didn't like that my decisions would make someone else act a certain way. I guess I wanted to be kind of responsible for like myself as much as possible. And I think if you have a boss or an employer, it's harder to do that because you're at sort of their whim. So I think at some point I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna really do this.
Right. No, that
Yeah.
makes complete sense. I mean, in some ways you're held, by your boss or the company that you work with, which may not promote you expressing certain interests or thoughts that are relevant for you and not the organization, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so tell me, this is interesting. What is the cannabis industry's current place within the media landscape? And we can talk about, I guess it would be some traditional type media versus like the independent news that of course Honeysuckle is focused on.
Yeah. I mean, like overall for cannabis media, I think it's definitely kind of spectrumy in terms of like, you have like tech, you have industry, sort of like B2B, you have some cultural stuff. I think the cultural stuff is probably more indie. There's not that many independent. I mean, at some point you can't be independent. I think to really scale your company, you have to have partners and get investment and grow. Like, I think that, like, I read today that Weed Maps is doing like a docu series with Vice, with Killer Mike, and I think like that's the kind of stuff that you'd want to do. Not necessarily exactly that, but large scale, operations in editorial and in creative film or whatever to like really change the narrative. So like cannabis is new, you know what I mean? So it's like even like Rolling Stone, who I was kind of had like a small project we were communicating about, like the budgets aren't really there for mainstream publications to work, I think, in a monetary sense with a lot of cannabis brands and stuff like advertising. But as the industry grows, I'm assuming that's going to change. So the question is like, how will independent media stay afloat?
Yeah.
So I think it'll just be like, is there a place for small niche media that like emerging brands want to work with, or will everyone just kind of have to like scale in some way?
Well, don't you think though that there is a shift in small niche media compared to corporate media, and just the fact that there is, a certain amount of distrust or misinformation that's spread regardless of what side it is, but it's out there, right? So it seems like people are gravitating more to independent journalism or podcasts or other alternative media outlets to kind of get their news. I mean, do you see that sticking, or is that just a trend right now?
That's interesting. I think like I've sort of witnessed it as generational more. Like I feel like, my parents who are more of like the boomer generation, for example, are still getting their news from mainstream media, and it's very like CNN or Fox News, and that's kind of
Right.
it. Like younger generations, I think they're more critical. I think they do look to mainstream, but there's also actually a lot on social media. Like I kind of feel like that's where a lot of people are getting their information, like Reddit. For independent, I don't know how many people look to it as a news source as much as like a lifestyle, kind of like, you know, more like leisurely kind of like cultural reading. I don't know how many like reliable independent news sources there are. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think that there are a lot.
Mhm.
So I agree with you there. I think when I think of the word independent journalism, I think of an entity that's basically decentralized from the conglomerates and not taking in funding that could alter their objective reporting, right? But I don't know, those don't even exist today, and there are a majority of them that claim that they are independent in that formation or in that example, right? But they're probably not at some point, because at the end of the day, like you said, it comes down to advertising dollars and I guess keeping the advertising money flowing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some university funded platforms that I've seen that are independent, you know. Um I think I mean, first of all, it's tricky because I think news overall is just it's like complicated. It's like most I think reality is kind of subjective anyways as it is. So it's like you kind of need to hear it from the people actually, like,
Right.
and you know, for example, yesterday, this is a great example, I was in Harlem and there's a woman running for 70th district or assembly, I don't know the exact term. She's running for Harlem seat, right? She
Okay.
was born in prison. She's been in the carceral system. All of her network was there, like pretty famous people, and they were talking. They're the ones who are from the projects in the streets, like are fully victimized by like everything in America that's bad in terms of policing and capitalism and public housing, and like they are the ones who like make sense to me, you know what I mean? Because they have been thrown in jail. One guy was incarcerated for 13 years. And then one man visits Rikers 3 times a week, you know what I mean? Helping 16-year-olds. So it's like when they say what they need or what this country is doing or how they feel, like that makes sense because they've actually lived it. I mean, I think reporters, when they're removed, it's like, how much can you really know? I think to your point, like mainstream media is probably not going to get that like gritty and deep with everything, and at the same time like independent media, it's going to be really hard to reach a really wide audience. You only have these like volunteers or like grassroots, and at that point you're almost a nonprofit, and at that point you probably don't have much money.
Right. And I think that's a really good point you made, a really good tactic. And I actually, I guess now that I think about it, I've been slowly doing that without realizing, but I have seen a difference in not being influenced with what I'm reading of from like a headline, right? Regardless of if it's Fox News or CNN. I mean, there's those hooks that clickbait that kind of tend to sway your judgment of what actually happened, right? And so when you look directly at what that politician may have said and you watch the video firsthand instead of reading the article first, um, might help be more of an objective tactic. You know, I think that's what you're saying. But anyway, that's how I took it.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the thing that like some politicians, like you know, they were actually, the group was complaining a lot about Eric Adams, who's New York's current mayor, and like he's African American, you know what I mean? So a lot of people assume that like there's a certain amount of understanding there and empathy, but like basically they're saying that a lot of people who have their like roots in activism or their roots on the streets, quote unquote, they get into politics or into the political machine in the system and then just completely lose sight of that. So that's always a risk.
Right. I mean, that's where the PAC money comes in, right? The making promises on the way up as you're excelling within your political career. And I've heard that firsthand. I mean, you know, interning on the Capitol and whatnot in college, but that's neither here nor there, and that's a whole separate discussion, Ronit. Let's stick to the topic here. And you know what? I want to talk to you about the challenges of owning and operating an independent media organization. So you founded Honeysuckle magazine. What's it like, particularly in cannabis?
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely been an evolution. It's definitely challenging, absolutely. Like um you know, for us we have like 5 revenue streams, so we're like a fully operational sort of like company. You know, we have billboards, we have digital, we have print, we have events, um but you know, like to scale them is a whole nother thing. So it's like we've got our core operative or operations, and we have a really strong team. You know, cannabis kind of started in 2017 for us because like before we were definitely very like underground and like talking a lot about the sex industry and porn, and also always like taboo, you know. And so naturally, I guess, just cannabis came into that conversation, and we were working with Tiana and like Shalise, who are activists, Shalise Rogers here in New York and New Jersey. And one thing led to another, and we had like all of the New Jersey Cannabis Commission in our apartment, in my apartment with my partner Sam, and we were speaking with like Leo Bridgewater, Shalise, Ronnie, like all these people who from New York and New Jersey who are impacted by the war on drugs, most of them like, you know, not white, not Caucasian, and explaining to us from sort of like an insider's perspective what cannabis is all about in this area. And that was kind of how we formed our narrative. And then like being already kind of political and underground, like we, you know, cannabis became more and more of a microcosm for all the other things we were discussing, like politics and race and everything, you know.
Right.
Exactly. So it just became such a strong thing, and like there was more content all the time, more and more. And we had our first cannabis edition, print edition. We had Alan coming on the cover, and we had this really successful launch event at his club, and like everyone in the cannabis community came out. And then like when they passed the MRTA last year, so from 2017 to when they passed the MRTA in New York, it was really hard. And like I didn't really understand why or even know what to compare it to, you know, except that cannabis is a brand new industry and a lot of people can't advertise. So yeah, it's Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. So that had an immediate impact, and brands felt more comfortable kind of advertising and everything. And a lot of states have been legalizing, as you know. So like the industry's grown with us and us with it. So before that, also there was much more of a dichotomy between like cannabis and non-cannabis content and ads. And like most cannabis brands and possibly readers didn't understand like combining them, you know. So like for us, it's like cannabis is kind of part of life and culture. It's not just like its own thing,
Right.
but people didn't like that. But I think as it evolves, it's easier to intersect everything. So those are some of the things that it makes it easier and better for us now.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. First off, it's so great that you're, some of the founding group, when you first met to kind of talk, that you had those perspectives, people of color that had, experienced social injustice through the plant, or, whatever their experience may be. So having it from that lens is awesome. And then, as you mentioned, it's the microcosm to different elements within lifestyle, right? And just culture overall. And so I could see how you're saying it over time, it just kind of fit into different segments instead of being its own topic on an island.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's evolved, right? So you can kind of talk about cannabis in different ways now. Like I think equity programs are in place. There are more organizations working for it. There are, voices vocalizing like the need to release cannabis inmates and all that. So it's like everything's kind of spread out. So you can like just look at the industry, or you can just look at brands, you can just look at social justice. But I think for us, like you couldn't take away the social justice for a long time. You couldn't take away certain things because the people shaping the industry, especially in New York, for us were the ones like that were impacted. So it was almost like sacrilegious or like immoral, and probably still is, to not have that as like the crux of the editorial content.
Totally. Yeah. No, it's important definitely to highlight that, especially while there's still people in prison for the plant, right? While states are online operating, companies are operating legally. I want to ask you about the evolution also in terms of, like, you mentioned the intersection of, let's call it the vice industries, right? The sex conversations, porn industry, and then you've got cannabis. And I remember moving to Texas and thinking it was so weird that I would go into a head shop or a glass pipe, and it would be like combined with a sex shop there, right? And it was different in other states from in that regard. But I guess my question is, has it evolved to kind of, I guess, be removed from the vice industry into kind of its own lifestyle and consumption topic? Or are you seeing from an editorial perspective that it's still kind of associated with those vice industries?
I think that it is still associated, unfortunately. And I think that also like there's still stigma like everywhere, and which is weird. Like,
Right.
right? I think for us in the, what?
Go ahead. I agree with you. It is weird that there's still stigma, but yeah,
Yeah.
continue.
I think for us, it's like, why? It just doesn't make any sense. We're in our little bubble, but it is, and I think that people probably feel a little bit uncomfortable, like what's the word I'm looking for? Tainting their like plight for like naturalization with adding sex to that. So like, I think some people like are cool with it. And I've been having these conversations because we did want to try to have some events that cross, or I've had people approach me to have kind of like 420 and sex positive events.
Yeah.
And it's like hard enough to get sponsors and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, well, if we add sexuality onto it, but I think it's there. I mean, I think, online, I don't think it's a problem, but for like Google ads or something like that and advertising overall, you can't have either one of them. They censor both sex and, I mean, even, Instagram, you can't have nudity and you can't have weed. So,
Right. And on Twitter, it's like wild west. I mean,
oh my God.
you could scroll through the feed and see people having sex or nudity, and you're like, what is going on? Just because of somebody who may have liked another post or something, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so the way in which channels censor content is really crazy, and they're still working through it. I mean, I feel like they're moving the goalpost, which is really complicating it overall, right? It's not like you can say this is censored, but this is not, and then continue to change those parameters over time. It's just either got to be on or off. And I think that it's coming close to that decision. I mean, what are your thoughts on censorship?
Well, it's funny because I actually was just on a panel at South by Southwest on censorship with Juanjo Fejo, the COO and CMO of Weed Maps, and Javier Hase from El Planteo and
Yeah,
Four.
Javier, he's been on. He's a great guy. Shout out to Javier.
Yeah, he's amazing. Benzina and a bunch of other publications, but
Yeah.
yeah, he was great. So like we were talking about that, and Weed Maps they knew it would get rejected, but they submitted a broccoli campaign that was kind of like a metaphor. Broccoli was a metaphor for cannabis. Did you see that?
I remember seeing that. Yeah. Did that play through the Super Bowl? I saw it online, but I don't know if it was on the Super Bowl as well. But
No, they
okay.
wouldn't play it.
Oh, they didn't play. That was the whole thing. Okay. Sorry. Spoiler alert. Continue.
No, it's fine. Yeah. So didn't play that. And then like Weed Maps, they're huge. They're like, obviously they're publicly traded.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So their Instagram has been taken down. And like I know, exactly, like Wiz Khalifa is on our current cover actually, and he was complaining because he was getting community guidelines. So if you're gonna like take down Weed Map and like Wiz Khalifa on, I just don't understand the logic.
I don't either. No, I don't. And that's why you see all these other platforms, I guess, in talks of being created or launching, right? Where it's almost like we're just creating these echo chambers of like your political ideology. If you don't like it here, you go over there and you talk about it with all kinds of people over there, and these people stay over here. And it's not good for society. And it's not really what the First Amendment was all about, at least in my opinion. And I think it's just adding to the division in this country.
You think?
Yeah. I mean, what do you think?
Well, that was kind of the point of the panel, is sort of like, how are people supposed to get educated or information? Like if stigmas and fear mongering exists, like, and you can't actually like share information, then yeah, kind of what you're saying, it maintains these sort of divides. Like, I guess I'm of the thought that like, I guess I just don't understand like why as a person you wouldn't seek information for yourself, like even if it's not readily available to you, but maybe people don't think like that, or just don't have the thought of like, or why would they even have the thought, I'm going to learn really what cannabis is really about, or they, what I mean, if they already think that they know that it's something terrible.
Right. No, and I think that's a great mindset to have, and I wish more people would have that critical thinking approach, because it's desperately needed right now. But I want to get back to your point about the stigma around cannabis. So like what specifically is Honeysuckle doing to destigmatize cannabis? I know that education is a big opportunity. So
Yeah. I mean, I think like we do it in different ways. So first of all, a lot of our like we aren't coming from the necessarily like stoner route. Like some people on our team are. They're stoners, they smoke every day and they love it or need it. Some people need it. Some people use it for medicinal purposes. Some don't smoke it or consume it at all. So, like for us, I think the point is that it's not bad. Like it just doesn't really matter. Like it's not a big fucking deal. Excuse my French. So it's
no, you're
like,
good.
yeah. So it literally, like whether you do it all the time or whether you don't do it at all, it's the actual act of cannabis consumption is nothing that anyone should really be concerned with, at
Agreed.
all.
Agreed. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, for us it's just like we have events that are cannabis themed, we do billboard campaigns, we have content that's not cannabis, we have content that is cannabis, and I think just like because it's helpful and instrumental for so many people, from like epilepsy to headaches to anxiety to whatever, and in my view it's 1,000% better or not even comparable to the pharmaceutical. I mean, there's real evils in the world, like the pharmaceutical industry to a degree is an evil, as are many other things, alcohol to a degree. So it's like to demonize cannabis is just stupid. I'm sorry.
I agree with you. And I think a lot of, like, to your point about a degree of the pharmaceutical industry being evil, which I tend to agree with you with, especially over the course of the past 2 years and what we've seen playing out there. But regardless of that, it's crazy to think that this plant has been illegal for over 100 years, and we've seen that there have been no overdose deaths associated with cannabis. We've seen that it helps medicinally for, you know, uh, epilepsy and other ailments. And we're learning more and more about it still. It's helping people with anxiety, stress, inflammation. I mean, all the above. We have an endocannabinoid system within our own human genetic makeup.
Yeah.
And yet it's just being held down, right? And it's not readily available to those who need it. And I think that if it were, the world would be a different place. And I know that sounds very hippie-ish, but I mean, there's truth to that, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So I mean, like my fiance, for example, he had a little bit of the reefer madness mentality. Like he definitely tried it and smoked it in college and all that, but there was a little bit of like, oh, alcohol's okay, even though he quit drinking, but cannabis. And then during COVID, he started smoking a lot. And exactly what you're saying, just with plant medicine and mushrooms to a degree, and or psilocybin and weed. I mean, that's what he kept having these epiphanies more and more, that like if everyone consumed this, like the world would be a different place. um I think a little bit what we were getting to, it's customized. Like personally for me, I'm very excited to when it gets a little bit more researched and advanced and there's more science to it, because
Sure.
like, and again, it's totally personal. Like some people wake and bake and they're attorneys or they're not attorneys and they can do it all day long and that's fine. But I think that's not for everyone either,
Right.
and I think that the way that it's been consumed in modern society isn't necessarily the end all be all way to consume, or the only way. And I think like the more science, like I said, behind it, like I'm curious to see what all like it can do, aside from extreme cases like epilepsy and autism, but like just for wellness and like microdosing, and like, using it in different ways and finding out all the different parts of the plant that we don't even know about.
Yeah, that's what most excites me too, is that kind of like future of medicine type landscape that we'll live in, where, to what you're saying, we'll be able to dial in like minor cannabinoids and how those compounds react with our genetic makeup, right? How CBD interacts with us compared to CBG or CBN, and isolating those compounds to treat certain ailments, to enhance moods. And I mean, that's going to be an exciting time. Hopefully we'll see that in our lifetime. I don't know if we will, but yeah, I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, and hearing you explain it, like that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, even if I don't break it down in my own mind mentally, that's like much, but I should more and I will more. But I think like in that way, like I shouldn't say, I mean, sometimes people need traditional medicine, but we all know the way that it is structured right now. It's like they basically blackmail doctors. Like you have to prescribe, you have to treat, you have to do these things. And if you've known any veterans, you know what I mean, who had to get treated, or even anyone with ADHD or PTSD, like they prescribe stuff that is makes you gain weight, people suicidal. Like these are just personal testimonies. You don't have to go far to
Right.
find, and then or even opioid heroin addicts. What's the one thing between veterans and opioid addicts that they can use? Cannabis. So
That's an easy no-brainer. And that is a no-brainer right there. And what makes me so angry, Ronit, is when I see the White House, rejecting the VA from doing research on cannabis, or blocking, funding for research, or just all those different moves where it's like, God damn, like these people are suffering. They served our country, for Christ's sakes, on the front lines, Brian Buckley had, I've said this quote a lot of times on this podcast, but I got to say it again because it's relevant. And Brian Buckley was on, he's a former Marine. Hellman Valley Growers is the company that he founded. But when he said that 7,500 soldiers died in Afghanistan since the war started, and I forget the timeline there, but since then 30,000 have died from being home. So home deaths, 30,000 from suicide, versus 7,500 overseas fighting in battle. And he said, so in theory, it's more safe for our troops to be overseas than it is at home. And that statistic just absolutely blew my mind.
wow, I've never heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's been quoted several times saying that it's gone different places, and we talked about it in that podcast. So to your point, though, I mean, it's there, right? It should be readily available and it should help, but it doesn't. And to your point about the pharmaceutical industry, I also think the structure is meant to keep you coming back in certain ways, right? Like some of the prescriptions that that they offer or they create, if it has certain side effects, well, they have something else that you can take for that side effect to alleviate that side effect. And so it's just kind of this chasing your tail game at some point where you're taking so many medications to alter and offset different effects where it's not helping you,
No, I think it's like hurting people.
Right. It's doing the exact opposite. You're right.
Yeah.
Well, the last part of this conversation as we wrap up, I want to talk about, and we've talked about this also, is the opportunity that the cannabis industry presents in terms of reshaping how business operations work and how culture within companies are formed, right? So we talk about uplifting women in this industry and really promoting women leaders. And so what are some of the steps or some of the stories that Honeysuckle is covering to ensure that women are being uplifted and included within this burgeoning industry?
I mean, I think just sort of native to our content is women and sort of even non-binary, LGBTQIA content since sort of day one. It's interesting because I have noticed that a lot of our content does center men and like a lot of our covers too. And that's simply because men are placed in the forefront and have like larger audiences a lot of times. So like you obviously want to talk about people, you know what I mean, with big audiences. So it's something I have to be intentional about in a certain way. Like in some ways it's totally native and organic. And then in other kind of promotional ways, it's something that you have to think about. So like, for example, our current issue, I noticed, we have like a famous hip hop star on the cover, which is great, but he's a man, you know what I mean? And he's not the first hip hop artist or musician that we featured who's a man. And so I thought, how am I gonna, I need to like offset this. So we did like a huge photo spread.
For those that are not watching and just listening, I have the website up, so I'll let Ronit kind of talk through it.
Yeah, so that's our current cover with Wiz Khalifa, who's obviously amazing, you know, and we got great photos. And then our next 420 issue features a famous hip hop rapper. And inside, so as you can see, like Shawana, Jessica Jackson, you know, gender pay gap, like we're consistently talking about women and you know, gender. But I guess I'm discussing referencing more our print magazines, like our covers. And so we have like a huge photo spread inside with like, I don't know, it might have been like 28 different women and across 3 spreads. I wanted to make sure and do that. And then like our billboard campaigns I do with women for the most part. Like we were the first to put cannabis and hemp brands in Times Square in 2018. And so that's kind of put us in a position where we're consistently doing these campaigns highlighting cannabis and hemp brands. And then I work mostly with women. So for New Year's, we worked with Etain and the Stone Age, which is now the Greenhouse for in Times Square. And then I've worked with Mary Jane Oatman and Shanae Bullock, who are indigenous from Nez Perce tribes and the Shinnecock. And we're going to be doing something together. So it just depends on sort of like our category. But yeah, some of them are fully motivated by women, and I'm fully aligned with women, uplifting women. I think also like our intern program, which trains young writers, is 90% women and BIPOC, and they've gone on to work at like NBC and Mattio and NPR, and so we're uplifting them in that ways for sure.
That's awesome. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
So tell me, what is Honeysuckle focused on in 2022 and the remainder of this year?
Good question. Certainly like, you know, growing our strategic partnerships because we want to scale. Continuing our revenue streams like in the out of home, print and digital, but mostly I want to do more film and video production because I think that there's a lot to do with cannabis and education and like lifestyle. And we both, my fiance and I, have filmmaking background, so I really want to kind of build that part of the company.
Nice. That's exciting. That's the fun stuff, right?
Yeah, for me, yeah, for sure. Kind of waiting for that.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to that content to come out as well. Ronit, thank you so much for your time today as we talked about all different things related to the cannabis media landscape. Where can people find y'all's website and social media if they want to learn more?
So our website is honeysucklemag.com, and our Instagram is at honeysuckle magazine, and our Twitter is at honeysuckle mag. And I guess I do want to just close with one thing that this conversation sort of like tipped me to.
Sure.
Is that, yeah, I think for me, the kind of crux of a lot of what we discussed with cannabis and medicine and everything is an element of spirituality that is kind of not there fully in our culture, you know. So I think that like plant medicine helps people obtain that or get close to it. But at the end of the day, I think everything from like the talk that I heard in Harlem yesterday, you know, for our politicians not listening to the people, or poverty and pharmaceuticals, it's kind of a lack of connection or something, and what I call spirituality. And so I do think that plant medicine and cannabis is kind of like that channel for a lot of us, and maybe why it makes people think differently, to your point.
I totally agree. There's this heightened sense of, call it spiritual consciousness, call it consciousness, but it's different than not consuming. I guess put it that way. It's a heightened elevated of that. So I totally agree. Great point to bring up. And I typically leave the floor, so I'm sorry I didn't do that, Ronit. I should have given you
no,
that.
that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't think that spirituality has to be connected to cannabis, but I think it is for a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Not at all. I completely agree. Well, thank you so much again. I have really enjoyed it. And hey, as things progress and evolve, I'd love to have you back on as you're covering interesting stories. So let's do it again.
Thanks so much, Kevin. This was fun.
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for listening. Bye.
Bye.